Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Trust and Safety series. I'm so excited to be moderating this conversation today, especially as we celebrate International Women's Day by shining a spotlight on the incredible women in trust and safety. I'm Lina Ghazal, Head of Regulatory and Public Affairs at Verifymy, and I've had the privilege of working in this space for several years, from a regulator's perspective, from a platform's perspective, and now in safety tech. Trust and safety is a field that touches so many aspects of our lives, from protecting children online to ensuring fair and safe AI systems. And today we want to celebrate the women who are driving these efforts forward. So we know that trust and safety as a profession is still evolving. And for many, the path into this space isn't always linear. At the same time, women in trust and safety often face unique challenges, whether that's representation in leadership, navigating complex and emotionally demanding work, or ensuring our voices are heard in shaping policies that impact millions. That's why today's discussion is so important. And so we'll explore first how each of our panelists found their way into trust and safety. Second, the role of women in leadership and the unique perspective they bring in the field. And finally, we'll look ahead at where trust and safety is going and how we can continue to foster diverse, inclusive, and impactful careers in this space. So without further ado, I'm thrilled to be joined by an incredible panel today. Caroline Hurst, Senior Manager Digital Child Safety at the Lego Group. Kaz Milne-Brown, Head of Life Policy Europe at TikTok, and Chanel Daniels, Responsible AI Manager at Digital Catapult. And they're all here today speaking in their personal capacity. So let's jump in. So to start, I'd love for each of you to introduce yourselves and share a bit more about your career journey. What led you into trust and safety? Was this always the path you envisioned, or was it an unexpected career move? And also, I'd love to hear, looking back, have there been any pivotal moments, challenges, or surprises that shaped your journey? And maybe we can start with you, Kaz.
Thanks, Lina, and thank you for including me on this panel. It's really great to be here, and I'm looking forward to our discussion. I'm Kaz. I currently look after policy for Live for TikTok. I've been in trust and safety for what feels like forever. I joined back in 2014 into Facebook, as it was known then. They're kind of very small public policy team in London. I think I was like one of the three people within the trust and safety team in London at that time. It was tiny. And before that, I had been working in PR, which I absolutely was not into. And luckily for me, one of my clients when I was at my agency in London was Facebook. And I was working on the policy and comms PR function, but from outside the business. And after a couple of meetings with people that worked in the policy team for Facebook, I got it into my brain that I was going to work there by somehow or some way. And I just remember walking along the street in London, and it was one of those moments where I bumped into my client and I said to her, I really want to join Facebook. I really want to be part of the policy team. I really want to make that move from PR into policy. And she said that there was a role opening, and then I was, welcome to apply. And I treated that interview like my life depended on it. It was like a war room of notes and spider diagrams and memory maps. And I put everything I had into getting this job because I knew that's where I wanted to be. So I joined the team. I got the job after I think it was 7 interviews for a contract associate role. Like, it was intense. Yeah, but got the role. And then I spent the next 8 years at Meta, working always in trust and safety in the safety team, focusing on predominantly supporting vulnerable communities on Facebook. So looking after youth safety, women's safety, LGBTIQ plus safety, and building out predominantly programs, but also looking at tooling and policies and resources and partnerships. And then I went on maternity leave. I came back. I decided to join Instagram, where I was head of policy partnerships for EMEA. And then I thought, right, 9 years in this place is far too long. I'm becoming part of the furniture. I felt very much like the wallpaper in a house. And I thought, right, I'm not learning anything. I need to be challenged. I loved partnerships. I could do it all day long. But the area where I felt like I had a bit of a blind spot was in the policy stuff. So like what I call like the policy nerd area, like the nitty-gritty of policy development and policy iteration and localization and data and accuracy and like all those pieces. And I thought, right, where am I going to get the biggest challenge and the biggest shock to the system, which I think I definitely needed. And I thought, I'm going to try and get into TikTok. I'm going to try and get into their policy team. And managed to do it again. So got into the policy team originally to lead regional high harm policy for short form video on TikTok. And then I had another maternity leave, which is another story I'll come back to maybe later in the discussion, and came back and I joined the live team. So looking at live streaming and all of the challenges that we face there. So yeah, that is where I'm up to at the moment. I would say that I've definitely grown up within the walls of big tech. And I've gone from, someone in their early 20s to someone rapidly approaching their 40s. And a lot of life has happened between then. So I'll hand back over to you, Lina.
Thanks, Kaz. That's a fascinating story. Thanks so much for sharing that. Chanel, can I ask you the same question?
Yep, sure. So I guess like thinking about my journey into trust and safety, it wasn't like I'd say that this is probably like what I would see as a second chapter in my career, like with the first one being the most lengthy, which was in public administration. But especially, I guess the challenges and the things I worked on the most there would be the things where there would be some element of a new development or a new nature of a kind of a very complex and systemic and but also quite urgent challenge. So my first public policy job was actually in China, working on EU-China trade relations at the time when China just joined the World Trade Organization, which is showing my age. It was a long time ago, but it was really. And then after that, I think that I had a big chunk of time working in UN peacekeeping missions in conflict affected countries or in countries where there's still a conflict ongoing. I'm doing this as if everyone would know, but I'm thinking of bullets. But yes, where there's still, it's like I do this, and yeah, outside of that area, that's not common expression to use. But yeah, but it's really, and then I was actually in the UK working on consumer protection policy, and especially this new package of policies that's now become that's now become a law, but it was thinking of what it means for kind of new digital markets and protecting consumers in these new digital markets. And this was going to be a temporary thing while I was also doing an MBA, because, being in the UK was a bit easier than being in places like South Sudan, where I was working before. And so, but then when I was contacted by, at the time, Facebook as well, at the same time that Kaz was there too. And I was contacted and it was a time when, I guess the initial recruiter wasn't so clear on kind of, on the initial phone calls and things on like what the role was. And I couldn't understand why they were contacting me. But at the time, I thought it was very interesting because I was doing this MBA, but I'd never been in a for-profit organization before. And as I was understanding more through the interviews and things, it was just really apparent how similar the area I was working in at Facebook at the time, which was especially kind of incident response and especially the kind of politically sensitive types of issues and the incident response there, like how similar that was to the peacekeeping firefighting I was doing before. Both in that context of kind of urgency, like, a lot of what I was doing tended to focus on where there's, what we would call in the industry, like real world harm risks and things like that, and where you need a very rapid solution, but also where solutions are not always as simple as people would think, because they would be, there would be so many different layers of complexity and like social, cultural dynamics and political dynamics that means it's not actually very easy to firstly know what the right thing is to do. And then even when there can be some alignment on how the response needs to be, like what does that mean to operationalize it, which is something that's also quite common with like peace operations and things like that too. So so that was my first role in trust and safety. And since then after being at a super large organization like Facebook, I then went to Depop, which was a very interesting challenge for me, because this was also, you're talking about a much, much smaller scale. They just gone through this kind of explosion of users, and actually there's just a very, very specific risk profile that happens when it's targeting a kind of, when it's a platform that's used by a different generation of people for like very different types of purposes, but also there's a social engagement element there too. And so I was there for a while and I found it very, really interesting, but I was also very excited and like thinking, okay, so I understand this problem space. And actually with thinking about new laws and new regulations and new technologies, it kind of feels like it's more of a manageable problem space. But then I was noticing a lot more about the problems that came from the automation kind of activities. And actually, so then I transitioned from doing kind of trust and safety in that probably more traditional kind of consumer facing technology space to what I do now, which is working on responsible AI, but specifically, the organization I work for and the projects I work for, it's really these kind of newer uses of AI as well, which for me is like this is the kind of challenge that's on the margins that it's still kind of it's where the response isn't so easy. This is the area that I'm in now, and then maybe when that response seems a bit kind of more straightforward, I'll move to something else.
Well, it's fascinating, and we'll come back to it in terms of skills, but you've already both shared like two very like fascinating trajectory in this space. Caroline, can I come to you now for your story?
It's like we've all written a totally different story. I absolutely love it. It really demonstrates the diversity, and I'm fascinated to hear as well. I feel like I know your two tales very well, but it's really nice to hear it as well, kind of in this panel when we're talking about something so specific. And just to echo, thank you for thinking of me. It's a real pleasure to be able to bring this voice as well to to this environment. So my way to trust and safety was not linear in that sense. I started out in the charity sector. My passion and my kind of skills has always been with young people. So I always thought I was going to be a teacher growing up. So I always gravitated towards the classroom. And I had a job where I was delivering social educational sessions in schools back in 2010. And do you remember when you're at school and you have those people that come and they talk about periods and sexual health and alcohol and all those fun topics that I love to not shy away from and make people really embarrassed and talk about them. Well, as part of that menu, online safety was part of it. And I was like, huh? I think I was about 23. And I was like, what? Why do these kids need to know about online safety? What's that got to do with anything? So skeptically, I like looked at the program and I was like, okay, I'll talk to them about online safety, fine. And there you have it. I found a specialism, right, in terms of what was really needed at the time, and it's still needed, kind of what the cause is in that sense. So I then spent 7 years at a different charity which specialised in online safety education called ChildNet, part of the UK Safer Internet Centre, and I spent a glorious 7 years going all over the country in the UK, delivering online safety sessions to teachers, to children, to parents, to small youth groups, to theatre groups, to other charities, you name it, I was there. And I really, really learned from a grassroots level exactly what was needed and what we needed to do. And I was a real advocate and campaigner around that. And that gave me so much energy. And I loved kind of being that advocate day in, day out. But unfortunately, living in London, I would work for charity forever, but living in London, you can't do that. I couldn't anyway. So I needed to transition. And actually, it was through ChildNet that I met Kaz. And it's a similar story to Kaz actually, because Facebook was one of our partners. We did a lot of work with them in terms of helping them to deliver some of their impactful child safety programs. And I thought, how do I get into tech? This is exciting. So I made Kaz my best friend, and whether she knew it or not. But I didn't really have the skill set to kind of hot foot it straight into tech. I think once you're in the charity sector, you could stay there forever. It's quite hard to make that shift. So I couldn't make that shift into the corporate world straight away. So I had a stint in UK government. Back then, like Facebook, which is now Meta, it was called DCMS, the Department for Culture, Media and Sport. It's now called DCIT. And they owned at the time the online harms white paper, or a green paper as it was then. It wasn't in law at all. And I had a real baptism of fire of understanding how UK government works. No policy background, just educational background, absolutely no idea. Got stuck in. Kind of didn't find my feet massively because it wasn't necessarily my strength, the UK government and the way in which there are layers, and kind of needing to really be very obsessed with Westminster in that sense, which I'm very into politics, but I don't know whether I had the right analytical mindset to stay in that environment. However, I still kept an eye on the jobs boards at Facebook and other places, and I also made sure that I had a role within government that work directly with the tech company. So, that's a real takeaway. If you're in a job and you have clients, like, I think working with those clients and creating networks is really, really important. Like I always say, you don't know where your next hire is coming from. So this is a bit stressful, but don't, not every day's a job interview. That's not what I mean. But you basically, everyone you meet, you don't know where the next opportunity is going to come from. So that, I think, is also really important. So a role came up at Facebook in Kaz's team, and I made her my best friend, and then I was able to work directly in her team and with her in that sense. And again, went through a recruitment process that way, and I was working directly on public policy programs from a safety angle, and coming at it from a child safety perspective, I think was really interesting as well, because I'm on this panel, trust and safety. It is my bread and butter, but I have a very, very set niche, and that's child safety. And what I'll always say in trust and safety is, once you know how to keep children safe online, you actually are in a really good position to know how to keep everyone safe on the internet, because they are maybe not the most vulnerable, but one of the most vulnerable users on the internet. So those policies that you put in place, or those prerequisites, that's really important when we're considering kind of what we want the online world to look like as a whole. So I really honed in on that, and I felt very at my depth at Facebook because I'd never been in a corporate before. And I really needed to kind of strengthen and muscle in my policy arm around safety policy programs. And then I also went on maternity leave. I feel like that's a really kind of key point with a panel in particular, when you're considering kind of breaks and understanding kind of how you then get back on track when it comes to various careers. And then I found myself looking for another role, and I saw that Spotify were muscling in on trust and safety in that sense. And there was a kids and family policy role that I was really, really interested in. From a harms perspective, I thought the vectors around abuse were really interesting, and the content was really interesting around Spotify. When it comes to trust and safety, it's not your typical content moderation in the same way that Facebook or Meta are, because the content is different. You're looking more at things like playlists or playlist images or podcasts. And again, from a child perspective, it's not necessarily a product that is aimed at children in that sense. So that was a really interesting foray into understanding, again, a different kind of tech company. And I think, again, drawing upon my child safety experience and my experience in government really put me in a good stead for helping to build I was basically the first hire for kids and family within Spotify, and they didn't really have that angle or embedded in such a dedicated role. So that was really interesting. I then went on another maternity leave and again in a position where I was looking for work. And then in terms of thinking about trust and safety and going back to my passions, what I would call the dream role at Lego came up. Because we're going back to kind of a product which is built for children and is a very reputable toy company. And I think through my career, I always wanted to be kind of where the young people are, in a sense, rather than kind of understanding exactly the products that we're building, which aren't necessarily built for young people in mind. Thinking about where I can add that advocacy angle again, because I think that's something that I was missing from the previous two roles. And I now work in the child rights and safety team at the Lego Group, which is a really unique team, like given all the other corporates I've worked for, because you're looking directly at the digital products in particular that we're offering to children and ensuring that we're putting children's best interests at the very heart of everything that we do there. So I kind of tell you that story because I feel like I've come full circle. Kind of, I started out in the advocacy piece and then I've kind of found my way a little bit. And it's really, you just don't know kind of where the job market's going to take you and what's going to pop up in trust and safety. But I just thought it was kind of a nice circle to end with and demonstrate that when it comes to strengths and your passions, it's not always perfect, but hopefully there are some ways in which you can find exactly where you feel that you can add the most value. And I'll stop there and hand it back to you.
I love this. Thanks so much for sharing this, Caroline. And I feel that with all your stories, it's been fascinating to kind of like hear the different paths and also the passion that you all share. I'd love now to jump more specifically in like women and leadership in interest and safety. And I'd love to hear, like, again, I have so many questions, but I might direct like some to each of you. Maybe we can start with Chanel on this one. Like, how do women bring unique perspectives to trust and safety challenges? And love also to hear, like, have you encountered like barriers in your career as a woman in this field, and how did you navigate or overcome them? I think you're on mute.
Yes. So thinking about this question, I would say, like, when it comes down to kind of safety, roles that relate to safety, protection, human rights in general, because I think it's actually quite similar to other roles I've done outside of tech. I think the thing is that when you're a member of a group in society that has experienced some form of challenge because of, I guess what we would call in legal terms protected characteristics, like which could include things like gender, things like this. Like, there's a different level of affinity you could have with noticing how there can be kind of, systemic or policy or operational or kind of just kind of, user engagement challenges that other people are also experiencing. Like, I think sometimes there can be that different sensitivity there. And so I think that that's been something that I've noticed a lot within my career, both in protection focused roles in the non-tech world, but definitely also within tech companies. I think there tend to be a lot of women that kind of gravitate to a lot of these types of positions because they understand what it means to experience that challenge, and they really want to make sure that other people are not going to experience something similar. When it comes down to the barriers, I mean, I've definitely had instances in my career, like multiple times, like it's quite often where I'm reminded that I work for a for-profit company, not necessarily a charity or the government or things like this. And that for me becomes quite challenging because actually when I've noticed like particular problems there, and especially where those problems tend to be quite systemic, it's kind of hard to ignore when I know that, especially like, being female presenting, I would actually experience that as well with using this platform too, or with engaging with this type of online community or things like this. And so I think trying to kind of have that separation, and I think just because of the politics of the day, like those kind of concerns worry me more now than they did this time last year. Yeah, I think that's that like that kind of personal challenge and what it means for doing this job where it feels like I'm accountable to the public while actually also knowing that I work in businesses that are, probably primarily thinking of things like shareholders and things like that. Yeah.
That's very interesting. Thanks for sharing, Chanel. Caroline, you actually mentioned network in your presentation, and one of the biggest enablers of success, especially in a space like this, is having the right networks and support systems. Can you share with us, like, what has enabled your success, and has mentorship, for example, played a role in your career growth? Can you share a bit more?
Sure. I would always advocate for networks in whatever situation you're in. I wouldn't be where I am today without those really strong networks. And I think in the safety ecosystem, particularly in the UK, we're quite lucky in that it's a very strong ecosystem. And it's very close knit in that sense. And I think due to the UK in particular, kind of, I guess, being a perfect storm around like lots of child safety advocates, like a very kind of unique and kind of pertinent regulatory, being the first kind of regulators around the Online Safety Act as well, looking at child safety and kind of the politics in general. Like, I know it sounds like there's I say storm because it can be quite rocky, but actually I think we find that kind of through trust and safety, and particularly women and mentorship and networks. But because what you're working on is quite rocky, those foundations, you need them. They're really, really important to you. Mentorship has been, I guess, informally something that I've always tried to do. So I always try and find certain people at work who I know are a kind of my cheerleader in that sense, and I'm a cheerleader of them as well. I feel like it's a female thing, having that sisterhood in that sense of like ensuring that you always have someone that has your back kind of within the company that you're working in. And I've always been of the mentality that at work we spend so much time there, we want to work with people who we get on with, and we want to ultimately, for me, like, I want to be a nice person and I want to work with nice people too. I'm not that interested in kind of muscling my way through and making everyone hate me just by getting my agenda through in that sense. And you don't make friends in trust and safety all the time when saying that. So mentorship and allyship is actually really important in these companies, because a lot of the time you are fighting, you are an advocate internally. I can't speak for everyone in this call, but every company I've worked in, you have an agenda that you're fighting, and it's really important that you have the right people around you who are in your corner and who are saying you're doing the right thing. This is really important, because you get no a lot. A lot of the time, particularly in trust and safety, because you're not necessarily making money, to be totally honest, in that sense. So your position needs to be really, really, really strong, and you need to be an expert. You need to have expertise. A mentor is so important in this realm. Only at the Lego Group, actually, have I officially kind of started this mentorship that I feel like I've needed in this sense. Also, I think it depends on the structure of the organization and how you and what how organizations find it important. Like the mentorship at the Lego Group, for example, has been really effective because the system's set up for success for me. I have someone who I can speak with, who I can spar with, who inspires me, who I inspire them. It's a two-way relationship. They're in a separate part of the business, but also similar to me, because they're kind of key in kids' engagement. So I can see another side of the business, so I can understand and learn from them. But most importantly, they also have my back, because I think when you're in trust and safety and a woman as well, and with a lot of other balls that you're juggling kind of elsewhere, it is really important to stay grounded and to have that person who you can talk to. And they've been invaluable for me since starting in this role as well, particularly in big organizations where it can be quite tricky to find your feet. Saying that, I still think, ecosystems like this are really important. I think this is a testament to how people in trust and safety stick together. I've worked with all these wonderful ladies on the school, right? And I think the collegiate environment of trust and safety is a hard one to kill, because we all have a sense of purpose that we're all trying to push in that same agenda. And I think also when it comes to women in particular, we have a similar, different experiences, but similar in terms of the way in which we perceive the world. And I think that's really important to come together. And networking is key for career growth, like internally and externally. I'll always advocate for that too.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. I like the internal advocacy piece. That's definitely key. And also like how informally those strengths are still there. Kaz, I'd love to come to you now and ask you, what can we do, both individually and at an organizational level, to foster stronger networks of support for women in trust and safety, and beyond mentorship? Like, how can companies create more inclusive, supportive environments for women in this field?
Well, I mean, an easy one, don't ban DEI initiatives, I think would be my number one point. And I think, beyond that, as women in tech, in trust and safety, yes, it's great to find mentors and have people mentoring us, but we should always be thinking about who can we mentor, who can we help. I think it's a fair point to say that I don't always agree that, women always have women's backs. I think in my experience, it can be men, it can be women. You never really know. Do you know what I mean? And I think my point here is, and this doesn't really answer your question, but I think for a long time I kind of believed the hype of like big tech. I drank the Kool-Aid. I really believed in the mission, and I thought, right, we're a family, we're all in this together. And I remember this one super senior woman at Meta was just like, Kaz, the companies never love you. Don't get it twisted. Your colleagues might love you, but the companies never will. And that has just always stayed in my brain. And I think now more than ever, as we see, big layoffs happening across the industry, like, you have to focus on what is important to you. And I think that is a bigger piece. But I think in answer to your question around what can companies do, I think they need to be supporting women from the get-go. I think, one of the challenges that I think I have found is coming into tech companies. You'll go into a room and it will be a lot of very kind of bombastic extroverts, and they really dominate the space. And so to find, your voice within those rooms is really, really tough. And so I think companies that foster inclusivity and, everybody has a seat at the table, and you might have somebody in the room that is the quietest, but actually they have the best ideas, but they just need to be brought into the conversation. They just need to be, Kaz, what do you think about this particular thing? You need those people that are like super aware of the room dynamics. Can you read a room? Are you seeing what's not being said? They are the skills where I feel like companies need to really invest in those people that can bring out the best in others. And the bombastic extroverts can do their thing, that's fine. But the rest of us can actually have our impact as well. It just might take a different form.
I love that. And I mean, I could sit and listen to you all day long. Thank you so much for sharing like all your experiences, wisdom. It's fascinating. I know we're coming close to an end already. I would like to finish by looking forward at the future of trust and safety, and looking ahead. Like, trust and safety is evolving very rapidly, whether that's the increasing use of AI, the development of global safety regulations, or the different innovations, new tools that empower users to have safer online experiences. So I'd love to hear from you. Maybe we can start with Chanel. What innovations or trends in trust and safety are you more excited about?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot, especially with the innovations, because the space I work in, there's projects where I'm so excited because I know exactly how this would have helped manage challenges I've been working on where we just didn't have the systems in place to do that. But something that I do find a lot of encouragement from outside of that is, I think, just because there's been so much more kind of media engagement on trust and safety, and a lot more understanding, I think, from the general public of what it means to have safe technology versus, technology that maybe hasn't got the same kind of safety standards and things like this.
Yeah.
I think that actually that the level of like the level of public demands from tech companies, like that increasing level of scrutiny, and we see that a lot with AI. Like that for me, I think brings me a lot of encouragement, because actually, yeah, like having people that are affected by the technology be given and being in a position to kind of have a much more informed and stronger consumer voice on what they would like to see in technology. And also having more organizations that are helping to bridge that gap between, users and consumers and people, that the public at large that are very concerned, and actually helping to kind of craft that into what that means for giving very targeted messaging to kind of politicians, or very targeted messaging to the companies themselves, or like turning that into very technical asks that other commercial actors are coming in and being like, we can build a safety tech solution that will fix that problem. Like, I feel like that, for me, that kind of having more of that kind of ecosystem with more voices outside of the company, I think is a very positive thing.
Very interesting. Thanks for sharing. And Caroline, can I come to you and ask, how do you see trust and safety roles evolving in the next, 5-10 years? How do you see it unpack?
Really interestingly, and I don't want to say it because I don't want to do any of us out of a job, but I just think that they need to be subsumed into companies, and that trust and safety needs to be embedded from the onset, whether you're a product person, a marketing person, whether you're a regulatory or a legal or a government and public affairs. I love my job. I really, really love it. But I think the way I want it to go is that, not that we're not needed, but that we don't have to shout the loudest in terms of really trying to encourage people to adopt certain ways of working around trust and safety, that we're not catching up with regulation, that the regulation's already there, that we're not backtracking on the most harmful content, and protecting, an afterthought of protecting our most vulnerable users, that the vulnerable users already feel safe from the minute that they step onto any technology. I think that we owe that to society. So without getting on my high horse and talking all of us out of a job, which I don't want to happen, of course, that is my dream. However, in the interim, I think even from, I think of our roles, and I don't know, Kaz and Chanel, whether you remember the Facebook Meta days. Everyone was really senior already when they came in, and I wonder whether we need more entry level, apprenticeships or students, and understanding from a policy perspective. Like, policy is quite hard to digest, but if you actually look at it from a trust and safety perspective, I think there's so much nuance there. There's social, economic kind of interest within policy. There's also kind of considering the tech side of things as well. We need to consider the public affairs angle. There's so many ways, but I don't think young people today know how to get into it. From an academic level, I'm seeing a lot around academia and research, and we need that more than ever, because I think a lot of our roles need to be embedded in research, and that needs to be funded more, and there needs to be kind of more focus on that when it comes to education. So how I see trust and safety evolving, I want the trust and safety folk to be younger in that sense, particularly when I'm thinking about roles where you're looking at children, because as much as I like to think I'm still a spring chicken, we're not, and we need to understand that if we want to kind of influence the younger generation, we need to ensure that we are working in the spaces where they are. Well, why not hire them as well to kind of ensure that we're building a kind of digital world where we want children to thrive, who then become adults, who then also know how to thrive in those digital spaces, so that trust and safety kind of is embedded in the long term, would be my sermon. And is over.
That's a perfect. Thank you, Caroline. That's actually a perfect segue to my final question to all of you. what advice would you give to young women considering a career in trust and safety? What would be your advice? Kaz, can I start with you?
Yeah, I would say a couple of things. So I've just finished reading Designing Your Life by Bill Burnett, these two Stanford professors. I don't know if you've read this book, but essentially they have this exercise where you do this thing called your work view and your life view. And the work view is like an experiment into like what brings you joy, what gives you energy, what are you excited about, like what is it that gets you going in the morning. And then your life view is about like what is important to you, like what matters to you as a person, like what are your values, like where do they sit? And the exercise essentially is looking at like how these two views align. Do they align, or are they completely off on a different kilter? And so I would say when you're thinking about a career in trust and safety is to have it crystal clear in your mind. What is it that you are excited about? Are you excited about protecting young people online? Are you really interested in AI development and like responsibility? Like, what is it that you're really, really passionate about? And does it align to who you are as a person? Like, what is it that makes you tick? I'd also say on another practical level, like accept contract roles. My role was a contract role. It's a foot in the door. It's a way to network. Don't be put off by a 6-month contract or a 12-month contract. Of course, we've got bills to pay, but these are all really great opportunities for you to meet people. And I think, just finally, like, do you believe in the company? Do you actually like the company? Do you use the product? Are you a fan of how it's presenting itself? That's another really big consideration and probably the main one actually when you're thinking about a career in trust and safety.
Thanks, Kaz. I think, yeah, the kind of like almost the trust and safety being like embedded by design in you sort of thanks for sharing. Chanel, what would be your advice?
So I'd say, like, I guess especially thinking of what it means for kind of the trust and safety in the AI space. Like I think there's been, or at least the way that, with my entry into trust and safety, that's been quite similar to the others and how it was at that time. Like if you worked in trust and safety, it meant you worked at one of the big tech companies and the job you were doing, like, academics might talk about it a bit, but no one would really understand because there was so little information being shared from the tech companies. And so to do the job, like it was very important for people to get into these big tech companies. Whereas I think now, because there's so much more like plurality with the field, actually there are so many different ways that you can engage with, online safety, keeping people protected from new tech innovations and things like this. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to be within one of the big tech companies. Like there are so many different kind of NGOs, academic institutions, people setting up projects by themselves, like people I know of it within a company that have just decided to set up this kind of group of people within the company because they're really concerned about the use of technology in this very, very particular sector, that wouldn't necessarily be known, or that wouldn't necessarily be on the radar of like, the big tech companies that provide the technology to this sector. Like I think there's just a lot of different ways that people can, I guess going back to Kaz's point of like thinking of what it is that you're very passionate and motivated about and what aligns to your values and finding a way to make an impact there. It doesn't have to be in a company.
Amazing. Thank you. And Caroline, to close us off.
Sure. I think I've said a lot of it already in terms of the way in which you choose a job, or not necessarily you choose a job, the job sometimes chooses you, right? It's sometimes circumstance. Like I would echo Kaz. I also took a massive risk and took a contract role as well. And if I hadn't have taken that contract role, I wouldn't be where I am today either. And I, again, don't be put off by that and the systems that are put in place. I think I will go back to a previous point, which was around networking. And what I mean by that is if you find yourself an opportunity, even though it's not the most perfect opportunity, and even if it doesn't light your world alight, or it's not aligned to your values, or it doesn't feel like a good place to be, because in all honesty, you will be in places where it doesn't always align for you, but to find the opportunities where you can. don't get too distracted in the role that you're doing, but look at your strengths and what gives you energy and where you find value and value add in that respect, and network. Network your way to either finding a new opportunity or not. And as I said, kind of through this conversation, it's a bit stressful to think of it this way. I don't mean treat every day as a job interview. That's not what I mean. But I had coffees. I remember when I was in DCMS, I went for a coffee with someone as part of DCMS who happened to be my boss at Meta. And we just went for an informal chat there. And I was presenting on something like a project that I was working on in DCMS. And I think I didn't know I was being interviewed at the time. I wasn't being interviewed at that time, but that conversation clearly went well, from their perspective as well. So depending on who you meet, it's really important that you can see those opportunities and how they will build. And even if there's an event and you don't really feel up to it, you don't want to go, try it out. You don't know who you're going to meet in that situation. I'm sounding like a dating columnist in this regard. I don't mean it in that way. I just mean that the power, I think, of networks and communities, particularly in this space and particularly for young people, is your biggest asset at the moment.
Amazing. I mean, this has been such a fantastic discussion, and we ran out of time, but I guess it's a good sign. I want to thank each of you for sharing your time, your insights, your experiences. This is so valuable. And I want to thank everyone for watching, listening to our conversation. I encourage you to continue these discussions beyond today. Let's keep supporting each other, advocating for each other, advocating for change, driving innovation in interest and safety. Thank you. Thank you to all of you.